Yay, we're live. Hey, aloha, love tribe. Welcome to the Bitcoin Piece of Music podcast. I have Andi Pitt with me, who is the co-founder of Ego Death Capital. She's a Wall Street rebel, a poet, and she loves trees and is on a mission to make the world a better place with the magical powers of Bitcoin. Yay, aloha. Welcome, Andi.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
So you've just completed a monstrous move and starting some more new chapters of your life. How exciting. Do you want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, so I used to live in New York. The last few years I've been living outside of the US, but just given everything that's happening in the US and with the fund, I really felt like it was the right time to move back. So just moved to Austin, and it feels great to be here. So much
So
innovation and amazing people here, so it's
have
really
you gotten to
exciting.
go to all the meetups and meet all, like, is it, and just
Not yet.
not yet?
No, that's all ahead of me. So I
It's
just
ahead of
missed the
you.
last meetup, and I'll go to the next one next month.
Oh
But I have
man.
met quite a few people in the Bitcoin space here already, so looking forward to getting to know everyone better.
It's like Silicon Valley for Bitcoiners, it seems like, huh?
Yeah, it feels a bit like that.
So cool. I got to go out there, like, I think it was about 2 months ago for a wedding. So that was really cool. And it was a Bitcoin wedding. So it was my first
Oh no.
Bitcoiner wedding.
What was that like?
Awesome. Like, everybody there was a Bitcoiner. And so it was
Oh
just
wow.
super cool. And, like when you go to social events, like, I don't know if you're like me, but all I do is talk about Bitcoin and love and spirit, and music and all that. And it was just like, yeah, everyone's on the same page. So it was definitely very nice to be around so many people and celebrating love, of course. So it was great. Okay, well, let's talk about Ego Death Capital. How the heck did that come about, from going from a VP at Goldman Sachs and, letting all that go, and then, getting started with Ego Death? Let's everybody talk about what Ego Death Capital does.
Yeah, so I left Goldman a few years ago. It was amazing. I got some really amazing experience, got to work with some really, really brilliant people there. But at the end of the day, it wasn't, I guess, fueling a passion of mine in order to kind of have a positive contribution in the world in some way. And I always had seen from a pretty young age how unequal the world is and how dysfunctional it is in so many ways, and kind of seeing that at a very, very structural level, there need to be changes. Um, and so I took time out. I actually ended up starting a tech company based around community. So, with the idea of creating a platform for communities, which is something else I'm really passionate about, and really interesting how
Hey.
so much of Bitcoin is about community.
Mhm.
And it's, again, this sort of structural issue with our society that people don't have the right community structures and kind of people around them, leading to this extraordinary epidemic of loneliness, which is estimated that people who are lonely, it's equivalent of smoking packets a day of cigarettes in terms of the physical health implications.
Wow.
And so that was, I've now merged that company into another company, and I'm working as an advisor with them. And really
Mm.
excited, I guess, about Bitcoin coming to Bitcoin, and now being the right time to start building something in the space. So I had been friends with Nico had been friends with Jeff, so Jeff Booth, Nico Lechuga. Um, and between that, we sort of ended up coming together and talking about what was happening in the ecosystem in Bitcoin, and realizing there was this lack of capital, lack of kind of expertise and support that founders needed. Jeff having this incredible experience of having built multiple companies, being an advisor, a chairman to multiple companies, me having this kind of investing experience from Goldman, and then Nico having really this entrepreneurial experience, particularly around consumer branding, as well as private equity in emerging markets. So it was a very interesting combination of different skills and backgrounds. And then we brought in this kind of incredible advisory board that is a privilege to work with them, to really round out the team. So it sort of all came together pretty quickly this year.
And it's really exciting, because when I saw Ego Death come on, I like, how many months ago was it? I was thinking, "Ooh, this is exciting. Like, what's going on over with you guys?" Um, how it's been like mid-year, you guys were kind of getting going?
I mean,
end of spring?
it's been longer that we were working on it and starting to think about it. But I guess the public announcement came just after Bitcoin Miami, so in April or May.
Cool. And so can I want there's so many threads I want to pull on with you. Do you want to talk at all like about any of the projects that you're working on? Is that okay to talk about what's going on out
Yeah,
there so that we
absolutely.
can get excited about new things?
Yeah, it's amazing. We've spoken to so many founders, and it's just really, really exciting to hear what everyone is building. And it's really, I guess, a privilege where we sit that we get to talk to all of these brilliant entrepreneurs to learn from them, to learn about what they're creating, to learn about how they see the world, how they see Bitcoin. So we have announced two investments to date. So the first being Fedi, created by Obi, Justin Moon, and Eric Syrian, which is around basically creating this federated Chaumian mints in a way interoperable, such that it becomes this really interesting second party custody slash community banking model, particularly applicable in emerging markets, but also in developed markets, and kind of really addressing, I guess, Bitcoin has always had a few challenges, three of the core ones being privacy, scalability, and the custody. So custody being quite difficult. And so they look at all three of those, but really the two that it's solving are a better method for custody. So it's no longer I have to do this difficult self-custody, or I have to put it on an exchange, which I may or may not trust, and that may or may not collapse. And then secondly, it provides this really interesting privacy layer as well, and then also helps with scalability. So it's an incredible team. We're so excited about what they're building. We co-led that deal. And then we announced last week our second investment, which was in Sonota, run by Austin Mitchell and Lisa, and also an incredible team. And their vision is they come out of the energy industry, so they've seen firsthand in their decades of experience how the financial transactions in the energy industry are basically the same as they were 50 years ago, with cash lag, creating credit risk, with paper legacy systems, a whole bunch of different issues, and how that really hampered innovation in energy, and energy obviously being such a hot button topic right now
Yeah.
around cost and scarcity. And so they saw this potential of, if you could have energy payments on Lightning such that the financial flows now were digitized, that they match the physical flows, and how that could really unlock this huge surge of innovation in energy, by reducing costs as well as just allowing that innovation. So that was the second deal we led. Again, amazing to support Austin and the team. It's just really cool to get to know these founders and work with them. We just are in the process of closing our third deal at the moment. So it's signed yesterday, just waiting for all the
Whoa.
other signatures. So that should be announced in the next couple of weeks. So I won't say anything more about that at this time, but stay tuned. Again, a
Yay.
really, really exciting technology that will really unlock Lightning for a lot of people all around the world. So really what we're looking for is these companies that have this really big vision, of kind of something that's really scalable, that can have this really big impact in the world.
I love it. And did you ever even imagine, like, when you were, younger, that you were going to be doing something of this nature?
No way. When I left Goldman, I thought I would leave finance. I didn't know that I would come back into finance. And this is very, very different, obviously. But it's actually really nice to come back and realizing all of the things I liked about investing, I liked about being at Goldman, of learning about businesses, of thinking about economies, of structuring, of problem solving, of supporting, in that case, it was supporting companies. In this case, it's supporting companies, but more personal, so more teams and young entrepreneurs. And just it's this, I really, really enjoy that. But now being able to do that in a way that's kind of something that I'm so passionate about and really feel is creating this huge positive impact on the world, is pretty phenomenal, and not something I would have expected when I left Goldman.
And did you know about Bitcoin when you left Goldman?
Yeah, I did. So I was sitting on the trading floor when Bitcoin was doing its runs in 2017, its big 2017,
Mhm.
2018 run-ups. And there was a lot of talk on the floor. I think there was some guy who had invested a little bit years ago and made like a bunch of money and resigned. So
It's
there
like
was definitely, he was
later.
basically like, peace out. Um, and I didn't fully understand it at the time. I ended up, when I left Goldman, spending a lot of time in crypto more broadly. And was, yeah, I've talked about this before, but it's kind of was a bit put off by the culture. I didn't necessarily see the use cases making sense. And so it's really been in recent years, I think, with a lot of people that it's become much clearer the structural issues of the world, and so many of those really stemming from the monetary and economic policies that we're grounded on, creating this huge degree of instability, of inequality, and Bitcoin really, and that all just became so magnified during the pandemic.
Mhm.
And so Bitcoin really being this, yeah, it's so I've come to Bitcoin, I would say, more in the last year since I left Goldman.
And what's been your biggest, like, driving force that you think Bitcoin is gonna like, I keep hearing you say inequality, and, like, do you feel like that Bitcoin is gonna be more of an equalizer for people going forward? How do you think Bitcoin's gonna help this problem?
I mean, there is one issue, like one fundamental challenge I do see in Bitcoin, which is the inequality in how it's currently allocated, in that there are a lot of people like the Bitcoin whales who own a lot now. But at the same time, if I look at the current system in developed markets and then globally, it's just pushing everything towards inequality and towards division more
Mhm.
generally. So in division and inequality in income, but also division in political views, um, and between countries. Obviously, we're seeing so much more of right now, whether it's US, China, Russia, all of these dynamics. Um, and so it's hard to know exactly how the Bitcoin uh, system will play out. But all I know is right now, the current system is broken, and Bitcoin really has the potential to be um, that next evolution of a global kind of financial and monetary and economic system, political even, that has the potential to really create something that's much more sustainable, much more equitable, much more stable, than what we have now.
And what do you feel like the rate, because I have this mindset that, like, we're in a race against CBDCs, and and so to me, the more we can get people onboarded and at least starting to utilize this network and understanding Bitcoin, the better off at least we could have some parallel universes for people to exist in and opt out of. How do you feel about that? Like, with the kind of, it just seems like it's breathing down our neck right now with these CBDCs.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think CBDCs are very, very scary. And I think they're moving quicker than maybe I had expected. I had sort of seen it as being something that the governments will take a long time to develop, but what we're seeing is that private sector participants are creating the technology that then it will be really easy for governments potentially to utilize. That's going to be definitely incentivized in places where you have authoritarian regimes.
Mhm.
So already say countries in Africa which are importing surveillance technology from the US, sorry, from China and
Mhm.
Israel, but primarily China. It's these sorts of countries which are going to want to adopt. It's going to be so highly incentivized for them to adopt CBDCs because it adds that extra layer of surveillance, and they
Yeah.
can do it under the guise of technological advancement, which is pretty scary. But even in the US, Europe, the UK, Australia, they're all talking about it. So I definitely see it's a race, and we need to move Bitcoin as fast as possible. At the same time, there is in a way a difference between Bitcoin and CBDCs, and that CBDCs are still tied to national currency. And for so many people and nations, there is a need for an alternate reserve currency to the US. So the fact that the US is the world's reserve currency is having extraordinarily negative implications, both for the US as well as countries around the world not having any effective global reserve currency. And so Bitcoin becoming that global reserve currency, there is still a place So I don't necessarily see it as one or the other. At the same time, I definitely appreciate the race. And I definitely think we need to get Bitcoin moving as fast as possible.
I know. And how do you what do you feel like what's been the best results that you've seen as far as like mass adoption? Like to help like where are the locations, obviously places that need it more than we do in our first world, where we have the dollar. Like how are you finding, with your work?
Yeah, I think I'm really excited by, I guess, both Fedi and Sonota to create mass adoption. So Fedi from the perspective of, um, they have this target of reaching the next billion, onboarding the next billion people to Bitcoin, and really focused around emerging markets and developing technology, which is very applicable to emerging markets, also developed, but that's really the design, where the design is coming from. I saw it I was just in the Republic of Georgia in the Caucasus. It
Yeah.
was really interesting that Bitcoin adoption is really high there.
Hmm.
They actually had a problem where they had almost free energy in Georgia, and they actually provide completely free energy to communities living in these mountainous regions to incentivize people to live there. That's for two reasons. One is because to preserve the culture, there's these incredibly beautiful ancient villages there with a way of life that's the same as has been for hundreds of years. But
Whoa.
secondly, they're border regions with Russia, and Russia
Mm.
has invaded part of Georgia a few years ago. It's there a lot of tension between Georgia and Russia, and so the government is trying to keep people living in these border regions. One of those is providing free energy, and there were lots of basically they heard about Bitcoin mining, and all of these villages in these remote areas of the Republic of Georgia were getting little Bitcoin miners, and mining Bitcoin, and then it started creating energy shortages in those areas. So the church is very, very powerful in Georgia, the Orthodox Church, and they actually got all of the local villagers in and made them swear an oath not to mine Bitcoin, and it was completely successful. So after that,
Oh my
the
gosh.
mining went down, and the energy shortage was no longer. So that's kind of an interesting use case where we've seen quite high adoption in Georgia, but I think from my conversations with people there, a lot of the reason people adopted it was because it's kind of a get rich quick scheme,
Mm.
um, as opposed to necessary. But then I think also they see so much political instability around them. The Republic of Georgia is one of the few countries which has come out of the post-Soviet. It's post-Soviet, and it had an authoritarian regime until very recently, and they've been pretty incredible in terms of the political shift that they've managed to do there, and not falling back into these highly, highly corrupt and authoritarian ways of doing things. So they're a pretty interesting case from a political perspective. That's complete tangent. And then I think also places like South Africa, we just saw a big supermarket chain there
Yeah.
allow lightning payments. So that's really, really interesting. I think there's going to be moves around that in Mexico as well. Just reading, I've lived in Mexico, and they're so tied to the US dollar there, and they're so at the whim of where their currency fluctuates. So I can see there that there's also this rationale for them wanting to use Bitcoin, and Mexico being a really, really big economy with a huge amount of potential. So I think these sorts of use cases are pretty exciting. And I think the pandemic just opened so many people's eyes and shone a light on what's really happening in the world.
It really has. I mean, I feel like it certainly opened up my eyes. I feel like I've been living under a rug for 50 years. I'm like, oh my God, this has been going on. I thought I was so like up to speed on things. And I just recognized like
Mm.
after this has gone on and then discovering Bitcoin, I'm like, what else don't I know? It's really caused me to question every single thing in my whole life because I don't. Now I'm like, well, I believed in this, and now is that accurate, or is
Mm.
this? It's really caused me to get a lot more. Do your own research and you know verify, don't trust. It's like, wow, it's been a very humbling experience to start this. Did you feel that way when you were getting, kind of in the transition from Wall Street to, full-time Bitcoin supermama?
Um, I always have questioned everything. I think that's just the nature of who I am.
Mhm.
If you do there's like these psychological tests you can do, One of them is ocean, and the first one being openness. And I score like 100%. Every time I've done any test related to that, I'm like 100%. So, which is very interesting and makes sense. But I think from a very, very young age, I've always questioned everything. And that comes partly because of my parents and how I was brought up, but also partly just because who I am, because my brother is quite different. And so that's what really, at a very young age, I was very passionate and interested in emerging markets and developing countries. And I could never understand, like, I couldn't understand how I could have such a different life to other people, how, in civil conflict or all of these problems, like how people could do this to each other, how someone born on the other side of the world could be, just by luck, have so much less. And so that, I guess I always was questioning that, and that going down that route, started to understand a lot more around the global, the hegemony in terms of financial and economic systems. So whether it's the United Nations, the whole conception of the nation state, and how damaging that has been in Africa, and how it's implemented in post-World War II and decolonization, and in a way that didn't match in any way the natural shapings of people, of geography in Africa, and in Latin America as well. So, and then you start looking, everyone just assumes the answer is aid. So there are certain very, very well-regarded people out there whose view is that the way to solve economic underdevelopment in places like Africa is through foreign aid. And I did a course when I was on exchange at the University of Michigan, which was called The Political Economy of African Development. And that really opened my eyes to what was really going on. And the problem was not a lack of money. The problem is rather the political structures, and all of that stemming from history, stemming from a whole bunch of different things. And foreign aid, foreign institutions like the IMF and the World Bank actually probably creating more negative impacts than positive, and all of the international structures that are really keeping them down. So this is very long-winded answer.
It's great.
But all of that is to say, I guess a lot of my explorations over the world have really gotten me to question a lot of things around global politics. Now, I was always seeing that there were huge problems with corruption, with governance in Africa, particularly, as well as, emerging markets around the world. I think what came to light really during the pandemic for me, and this was probably the biggest profound shift for me, was seeing that this was not only a problem in developing countries, but also in countries where I lived. So in the US, in Australia, in Europe, and just seeing the complete mismanagement of the pandemic by governments all around the world. And for me, the big shift was really losing faith in not only really in my government in Australia, I would say, because I think in the US, it's very obvious there are huge issues with the whole political process, with the way that government, with the electoral process, with the way that policy is passed in the US political system. And I'd always had put on a pedestal a little bit the Australian political process. And it became very, very clear during the pandemic that I was also not functioning. And I think that probably for me, just losing complete faith in my government was the biggest, because I had never really had faith in the global economic or financial system. But I think I had a degree of faith in the political apparatus in developed countries, which I have much, much, much less faith in now.
I know. And
it's all interrelated.
How do you process that on a heart level?
That's a really interesting question. As I've also kind of discussed with you and a few people listening to this might know, I have had a very deep spiritual journey the last few years as well. And I think part of that has been sort of clearing a lot of the conditioning, a lot of the kind of various things that we're taught around us, and coming back to learning to trust myself, and to figure out who I am, understand who I am, and then operate from a place of alignment and trust. And so I think as we're seeing all of the chaos happening in the world and not trusting necessarily those in power or the institutions or the structures in place, it's really important that we learn to trust ourselves, and to learn to kind of be secure and at home in who we are. Um, because otherwise, if there's chaos around, and insecurity around us, that is going to lead to insecurity and chaos internally as well. So
And do you feel like I hear you say you've lost faith in the governments and you've gained more faith in yourself and more trust in yourself. Like, do you find that your relationship with, I don't know if you say spirit, universe, God, Bob, whatever, like, do you find that, do you have a stronger relationship with that mystical creative force of the universe? What do you do? Do you mind if I ask you, what do you call it? Do you have a name for that force or that?
um, I I would call, yeah, no, I don't have a specific name. I could call it the universe. The universal source is probably something that I think resonates the most with me.
Mhm,
I think some people experience it as God, not in maybe the kind of a man staring down at us sense, but in the sense of this all powerful, all pervasive sort of force that underlies and informs, um, the nature of our universe. I don't know if, yeah, I would say it's all been happening in a similar time frame.
mhm.
So it's hard to know what's cause and what's correlation and what's kind of interrelationships, but certainly that aspect of my life has, of me, I don't know what you call it, but has become very strong in the past few years.
And what do you have any daily practices that you do that have got you through all of these crazy times and these transitions in life that you wanna share with everybody?
Yeah, I mean, meditation obviously is key. It's challenging for, it's never straightforward. It's not something that I am a master meditator. I definitely am not. Every day it can be really difficult. It can be, I'm not good at routines. So I think what meditation means to me is less about sitting on a cushion for, X minutes a day, focusing on my breath. That's an important aspect of it. But it's more around mindfulness more broadly.
Mhm,
So becoming mindful of my thoughts, of my internal mental processes, of what I'm feeling in my body, of emotion, and kind of this process of just becoming much more aware and conscious of everything in my life, both internal and external. So I think that's very, very important. And then community as well is really important. So having a community of people, spiritual practices or any sort of practice, whether you're spiritual or not, having a group of people around you that you trust, you can talk to, that historically has not been something I had in my life. And so that's something I'm very, very focused on cultivating and nurturing and, um, kind of supporting those around me, and in turn having people that support me as well. Um, and ultimately, I think through challenging times of ourselves or in the world, having people that we really love and support around us is really important. So having that as part of a daily practice of reaching out. And then I have a whole range of kind of other various practices, whether it's dancing and singing and playing music and just having downtime, walking in nature, all of these things, which are just super, super important.
What kind of music do you love?
Oh, I have a pretty wide range of music that I like. Great question. I love it. I grew up playing classical music, and my parents love classical music, so I absolutely love classical music. When I was living in New York, I would go to the New York Symphony all the time.
Oh,
Growing
wow.
up, we'd go and see the Sydney Symphony Orchestra in the Sydney Opera House very
Oh,
frequently, which was
yeah.
amazing. I played in orchestra up until I was in my mid-20s, actually. So I love classical music. It's probably my number one. And I love jazz as well. I lived in New York in the West Village, so I used to go out to the jazz quite a lot.
Oh, cool.
And then singer-songwriter as well, like some of these kind of just brilliant people who can just make you feel something and have poetry and music all together.
Who are you listening to?
Um,
Like what's the last song you listened to that you can remember?
right now, I'm listening to lots of like
Hmm.
interesting music. Very meditative right now, I would say. But I'm just looking at. I mean, I love Spotify. They do a pretty good job. So one person, this is just on my playlist, is Rainer Scheurenbrand, if you're American. I think he's German, but he creates this beautiful like medicine music,
Oh, send we used
and
to,
sort of
yeah.
ambient, beautiful, really beautiful music.
Will you share that in Twitter with me later or with
Yeah, I
everybody?
will.
'Cause
Yeah.
it that would be great. I know I'm always looking for different kind of I mean, the vibe is so important, obviously. I call it, we used to have the vibe tribe and call myself the vibe goddess, and it's like there just depends on what your setting is, obviously. It's like,
Hmm.
am I focusing and am I working? Do I need to stay calm and chill for this week or this day or this afternoon or whatever it is? Or do I need to like okay, pump up the jam. Let's
Yeah,
go. We need
totally.
to get fired up. So, I mean, isn't it amazing though how music just I mean, clearly you have a broad palette of likes and on your uh with music. And so isn't it just magical? Like when it's like as soon as the first note hits, you just know it's going to take you somewhere, especially if it's a familiar song. And I don't know other things that have that much power over me instantly. It's like it is medicine. I call it music is medicine
Yeah.
and the DJ is the doctor and you're the DJ of your life.
I love that. I totally agree. And I love when you find a new album or a new artist. That's like this whole world opens up.
I
I love
know,
that.
right? Because you think like,
Yeah.
oh, I've heard so many different genres or I've heard this stuff. And then all of a sudden you hear this sliver and you're like, somebody makes music that does this and I feel this way. Oh yeah, give me some more of that. It's never ending, it's it's a blessing. I'm so grateful for music with every
Yeah.
minute of my life.
Yeah, and it's so powerful to change your mood or to have any sort of experience. I think it's like the original abstract art, if you think about it. Before, I mean, no, the original well, probably music. Humans have probably always created music since we had voices and or birds. It's always been out there. And if you think about it, it's this sort of beauty that's created, which has this level of abstraction, which talks to something that is beyond our perception, beyond our ordinary waking experience of the world. And I think that's why music is so powerful. And everyone, if you think about the people who are most famous in the world, it's musicians, it's rock stars, and there's a reason for that.
Yeah.
It's speaking to something very, very fundamental, that the kind of very fundamental to the human experience.
Well, and if you think it's such a good point you make, because if you think about being in the womb, right, in our mama's bellies, it's like the first sensory experiences we have aren't sight. We hear things and you hear things
Mm.
consistently. Once you start developing when your ears develop and you can hear all of that's going on in your mama's belly and then all the things around her and like wow what an interesting experience and then being moved around and squished and all the crazy things it's like whoa I think it's just magical thinking about all this stuff we're going so okay so let's talk about Pacific Bitcoin so you're going to be there right
Yes,
yeah
I will.
I
Our
can't
whole
wait
team
to
will
see
be
you.
there. It's very
I'm
exciting.
coming. I got it. I got my
Awesome.
place is dialed in. I thought, one thing fell apart and now two new things came into place. And I'm like, that's exactly how it's supposed to happen. It's perfect. And yeah, so I definitely want to see you there. That's going to be so cool. Um, we're
Yeah, looking forward to meeting in person. It'll be
I know,
amazing.
me too. I'm super excited. Have you been to LA before?
I spent a little bit of time in LA over the years, but not a huge amount.
What are you looking forward to most for the conference? You're
Ooh.
speaking, right? You guys are going to be talking?
Yeah, so Nico and I will be on investing in Bitcoin companies panel in the Swan Dome
Nice.
on Thursday the 10th.
Nice.
So that's exciting. It's amazing. I think what Corey and the Swan team is putting together is really incredible.
Yeah.
I love that it's in LA. I have friends there that I haven't seen since before the pandemic. So
Oh,
I'm
cool.
really excited to just catch up with some people. And then in terms of the conference, I think, um, yeah, just being there and having, I there's some interesting speakers. I think they've curated an interesting group of speakers. I like some
Mhm.
of the conversations. I've seen the schedule, probably most of you haven't, but there's some really interesting conversations they've lined up, and which are sort of not your usual. I think they're really trying to kind of find some different topics, different ways of people to converse. So I'm really looking forward to that. And yeah, it's always nice to see my team and my advisors on stage as well.
Yeah, I
Um,
bet. Like, how cool like, you guys, seriously, you have, like, the Mount Rushmore of your team. You guys are the Mount Rushmore. It's pretty impressive. Um, like, all that brain power and soul power, like, each person on your advisory board plus the 3 of you founders, it's like, wow, what a team. What a great team. Oh, I was going to say, oh, the culture. I wanted to circle back about, you had mentioned earlier about you found the culture of Bitcoin off-putting at first.
mm,
Um, and so circling back to this event, how do you feel like people who aren't in Bitcoin yet, you know, um, a lot of people look at Bitcoin as it's a cult, it's a fad, it's a bunch of hoodie, shadowy supercoder dudes. It's a what Ponzi scheme, all the things that you hear from the objections. Like, what do you think we could do as a community, as Bitcoiners, to help um, open the doors and the minds, for people who are on the fence? Like, what do you
mm.
think is a helpful way for us to make the community inviting for each new person,
It's a really great question. I love it. A few things. Firstly, it was actually more the crypto kind of culture that
Okay.
I found off putting at first. So I first fell in the sort of crypto world kind of many years ago. And I think more that was off putting because I just didn't feel like what they were talking about made sense. Um,
Yeah.
so I found the people were interesting and fun, but there was just a level of it not being necessarily grounded in something that I felt made sense that was off-putting. The Bitcoin culture, I think is very different. I really love
Mhm.
that, at least from a broad perspective, there's such a mission kind of focus in Bitcoin of really
Mhm.
wanting to kind of come together as a community and make the world a better place. And people aren't just kind of creating and pumping their own tokens. And I think all of that creates so much toxicity.
Yeah.
At the same time, I do sometimes get frustrated. Not frustrated. I think there is a shift that could happen around, um, I guess, some of the really aggressive Bitcoin, around particularly call it criticism of altcoins, and it's a tricky one because it's important to call it out. It's important to criticize because at the end of the day, there's so many people who really will lose money in these things, whether it's
Mhm.
Celsius or Luna. And so having a loud voice on it, actually, to an extent, is really, really important. Um, and at the same time, I think having a degree of compassion for non-Bitcoiners and understanding and really recognizing that the way to convince someone is not to yell at them, but it's to meet them where they're at, and invite them in. Um, and but I think there's room for both people because there does need to be those people who really stand up and say it's not okay what you're doing.
Yeah.
Um, so I think it's a complex one. Certainly, there could be a lot more welcoming for women. Um, I don't think it's not welcoming, honestly. Like everyone I've met in the community, obviously mostly men, is amazing.
Yep.
It's really incredible how friendly people are, how welcoming they are, how people want to collaborate, work together. Um, it's so far and away, I think that's my experience. At the same time, I can see that if you don't have that person who holds your hand and brings you in, it could be an off-putting experience. So, um, it's a tricky one because I also sometimes find it tricky in my own life in that I don't want to talk about Bitcoin all the time, because I don't want people to be annoyed at me. And so whenever I talk about it, I'm like, okay, do you want me to keep going or do you want to talk about something else? And I like give them breaks quite frequently because
Oh
I
my
could talk
god,
about it
that's
all day.
awesome.
Um, and so I find drip feeding. So the same to change someone's mind, hitting them with a wall of information just like creates that like reverberation, that like reflection of it. And so the way to change someone's mind is not to like throw something at them, it's to like gradually infiltrate their psyche. Uh, so
We have to seduce their psyche. It's a seduction. It's
yeah,
foreplay.
and finding things that resonate with them as well. So I'm
Yeah.
gonna, I think I don't know how my mum will feel about this example, but I'm going to use her as an example.
We love
She'll
you,
probably
mom.
listen to this.
We love you.
But we were talking about the truckers convoy in Canada,
Mhm.
and I'm not going to say whether I believe or don't believe in their political views. To me, that's irrelevant.
Yeah.
What's relevant is that people should be allowed to protest. They shouldn't have their bank accounts frozen for protesting. That to me is completely insane that that happened. That's the type of thing you see in these authoritarian regimes in Africa. That is
Yep.
not the type of thing you should be seeing somewhere like the US, Canada, Australia. Like that is so completely insane,
Yep.
incomprehensible. But when I spoke with my mum about it, her view was that they were this very far right wing, that they were Nazis. My mum grew up in Germany, remember? So like there's a lot of kind of that's very close to home. And so at that time, she didn't really have a problem with what was going on in terms of the government freezing bank accounts and everything. But what my mum really cares about and is passionate about is the environment, and she loves trees. And now what we're starting to see in Australia is huge shifts in legislation to stop people from being able to protest around climate change or any environmental. So cutting down old growth forests, for instance, it's
Mm.
becoming much, much, much more difficult to protest at all. And so for my mom, that's when she realized seeing that happening, and it was like you should be allowed to protest no matter what you're protesting.
Yeah.
And so sort of finding that thing that she really cared about and a way to relate that then to this sort of financial freedom more generally, was something that I found helped her kind of see our point of view by me seeing her point of view. So I think it's like if we're trying to convince someone, it's about understanding what they care about, understanding what their values are, and then relating what we're saying to those values.
Yeah, I so relate with that, like, and I bet it's hard to, again, when you start to lose your faith in the government and in the process that you've been a part of for so long, and then to see it either ripped out quickly or slowly eroded. But
Mm.
that the trucker protest, to me too, that was a big wake up call. And I was just like, this is happening in Canada? Like, how
Yeah.
can this happen? What? They're shutting people's bank accounts down? Like that really, and I'm still a new Bitcoiner. I'm only in it for like a year and a half. And like full time a year, yay. Yay, thanks, Alex Gladstein. I love you. Changed my life, brother. But like when that started, I just was just blown away. I could not even believe that this is real, and then it really started helping me wake up to more of just the social injustices that are tied so much to the system of money, and the
Mm.
way that things currently operate. And so it makes you angry many times, you find yourself like, what, how could people do this to each other,
Mm.
and squashing our voices and our ability to protest, our ability to speak up, and this whole censorship thing, the cancel culture, it's very it's not I don't want to live in China. I don't want to live in a place where I'm not allowed to speak up and be oppositional if I feel like I would like to say something opposite to my government or to a business, like that feels Orwellian, and I don't think anybody wants to jump into that. So,
Yeah.
um, so is
And
your
it's,
mom now, like, is she more open to the conversations around Bitcoin?
yeah, I don't think she was ever close to the conversations, but um, I think she doesn't quite get it, I would say. I think we're still on the journey.
It takes time. I still don't get it, for God's sakes. It's like, I'm like, what is this cryptography stuff? Like, it's like, I think I get it. And then someone says something. I'm like, oh shit, I gotta learn that now. And it's never ending. And I definitely feel like that's exciting too. It's like music. it's never ending,
Mhm.
right? How are you on time?
I'm good. I'm good.
You're good. Okay.
Yep.
So I want to ask you about the social implications of Bitcoin. You were talking about you have a passion for building community, and you have a
Mhm.
passion and you started a company around that. Do you want to talk about the company, or would you rather talk more about the future of how Bitcoin is creating new forms of community?
Um, yeah, I guess I can talk very briefly about the company. It was really focused around the communication point. So there at the moment is basically no good platform for groups to communicate and to stay in touch. So Facebook created Facebook groups, which were very, very powerful. And that was like the first iteration of group-based social network.
Hmm.
Um, at the same, and obviously now with the decline of the main Facebook platform, um, and I personally never go on Facebook anymore. I think a lot of people don't use it very much. There hasn't been something pop up to replace that. So whereas you had different social networks pop up where could connect, all of which I think a lot about from a future perspective of how social networks will work. Um, but and then there's kind of, I guess, group chat 1.0, which has come out, which is, I would say, Slack and Discord. Personally, I cannot use Discord. It's so overwhelming and horrible, and the UI UX is terrible. It's
It's
just
terrible.
the whole thing is terrible. The
It's
culture, everything is terrible. And so there's nothing else out there. We use WhatsApp. I'm in so many WhatsApp groups. I just put them on mute. And so I just saw this big problem, and it was a problem I was having in my life. That I was like, I'm sick of these WhatsApp chats with 250 people, and it's just like a complete disaster.
yeah.
So I had this kind of way of creating technology around that, sort of idea that I wanted to build, and actually ended up learning to code and going about the startup completely the wrong way. But I created some pretty cool technology actually, and that's why it made sense to actually merge it in with someone. Um, because it was something I was interested in, but I didn't feel like it was completely aligned to who I was, and that growth, that journey kind of helped me learn that. But it is something I'm passionate about. So kind of merging that technology in with another company, with someone who that's really their like mission in life is really around community. Um, it just made a lot of sense. And so that's really exciting. The problem still exists. The company I'm very excited about. And I just completely see it. It's still such a big problem. We really humans are designed to live in community. We're not designed to live by ourselves
Yeah.
and one on one in small units. Humans evolved, an early hominoid existed probably around 4 to 5 million years ago, starting with, call it like Lucy. I don't know if you've seen
Was
Lucy
that
in
Lucy the ape,
Ethiopia.
or was that
She was like an early hominoid, really
an
little.
early
She was
hominid?
found
Okay,
in
yeah.
Ethiopia about 4 million years old. I've actually been to the museum in Ethiopia and seen her, and um, I've seen tracks. It's amazing just to think that like people similar to us, existed for 4 million years.
Wow.
Um, and so we were in hunter-gatherer small societies for essentially 4 million years of the 4 million years of human evolution. We've been in cities outside of that for, call it, less than 2,000 years. So it's like a microsecond in the context of human evolution. So
Wow.
humans are just not designed to live in cities. We're designed to live in community with, call it, 100, 150 people. You have support, you're constantly together, you're cooking together, you're hunting together, you're building together, you're sharing, you're supporting each other, you're really part of this community. Now, in a lot of ways, there's issues with that. Like if you have a good head chief, it's great. If you have a bad chief, it's terrible. Um, there's so many restrictions. So I'm not saying that we should go back to that or that's optimal, but I'm just saying from an evolutionary perspective, that's how we're designed. Then when we had cities, we had organized religion. So at least organized religion, terrible in a lot of ways, amazing in a lot of ways, but it had community structures. So you were part of a church, you could go to church, you would see each other every week, you would have support, and you really felt like you had this sense of belonging. And it's really just the past few decades as we've left the church and we haven't replaced that community structure with something else. And that is, if we look at so many health problems, mental health problems, all of
Mhm.
which kind of started in the 70s. There's so many other reasons. You can look at food quality, all of this, but that's been one of the issues of people just becoming so dislocated. And I think when people start feeling dislocated, when they start feeling isolated and unsupported and
Mhm.
lonely, and that's when they have to really become greedy. That's when they have to what's the word? They have to like hoard, they have to have more and they want more. And that leads to this kind of toxic culture of competition, of everyone wanting more, of overconsumption, and then of inequality and aggression. And it's like your nervous system just can't settle if you're not feeling somewhere that you belong and that you're supported. So I really see the development of community structures again, and there's so much experimentation happening, and I'm really excited about what's going on. We needed to go through this to be able to reform communities in a way that is like, I have the choice to choose my community and find those people that are my community. But I think we're still going through that process, and so it's still challenging for so many people in so many places.
I resonate and agree with everything you said, and I think before we got on before we hit go live, you had mentioned about, like, an epidemic of loneliness and how it's and I think we said it before we hit live, forgive me if I'm wrong, but you were saying it's the equivalent of smoking a pack of cigarettes a day or 2 packs a day to the stress that it creates in our bodies, is that correct?
Yeah, so and a lot of people may not realize there is a huge link between mental health and physical health. You can there's a amazing doctor I would recommend. His name is Dr. Gabor Mate.
I love him.
He's amazing.
Hero.
Read a lot of books about this. Written a lot of books about this. He's been a researcher for many decades.
Yeah.
But if we have mental health challenges, they impact our physical health.
Mhm.
We all know this intuitively. If you think about people having a heart attack from stress, or people their blood pressure rises because of stress. So obviously, stress is like a mental factor; it's an emotion,
Mhm.
well, arguably, and then that impacts our physical health, and that can kill us. Like if you get stressed, you can have a heart attack and die. And so if you're having being this whole range of emotions which have huge impact on us physically and cause illness, cause disease, cause cancer. And I know a lot of people think this is like very woo-woo new age bullshit, but it's not. It's all backed up by science.
Yeah.
It's just that the science is still emerging, and um, the science that backs this up doesn't bring billions in for pharmaceutical companies.
Mhm.
And so therefore it's much harder to access. And loneliness is one of these huge issues in society, and there's been studies that, and you can look out there if you just Google loneliness and health. There's so many studies that are done, a lot of older people, but health outcomes are terrible. Like if you're lonely, you'll die much earlier, you'll have much lower quality of life, um, general health throughout your life. And you sort of know this intuitively. Like if you're lonely, like you picture the lonely old man, he's not going to be, in health and vibrant and excited. Like, so I think we all know it intuitively. But yeah, there's studies that show it's like equal to smoking like packets of cigarettes a day.
It's
It's
crazy.
wild.
It really is, and I think obviously COVID had added to this, and exacerbated this problem, clearly, we
Yeah.
can't go be with our family, somebody's in the hospital, you can't visit
Yeah.
them, someone's dying, you're not allowed to say goodbye to your loved one
Yeah.
as they're passing, like, what a horrific thing that happened to our world, um, and I think about how social media has played into the loneliness, I remember it's about six and a
Mm.
half years ago, right before my divorce, I had moved from Hawaii to Colorado here where I live, and I felt totally lonely, like I didn't belong, and then I met this group of people, and I was on this little it was Voxer, so it's kinda like
Mm.
WhatsApp, and it was this, moms group and all this stuff, and I had this pseudo idea of, "Oh, look, I'm in this community and I belong," but I didn't. And I really didn't have that and it was all like technical, like I wasn't like, "Oh, we're meeting up in person and doing all this stuff." It's skin suits, And so there was an illusion of feeling connected and it was surface level. And it's like when things started really falling apart, there was only really one person who was there for me. Thank God bless her, But I wonder in this generation, especially with our young people, the impact of the illusion of connectedness because of how social groups can say, look, I'm in 10 WhatsApp groups or 5 Telegram groups, or I'm, have got 5,000 Snapchat friends or whatever it is. And so I feel like there's something that's like it's a veneer. There's a veneer of feeling connected with each other, and the technology tools are obviously magical. Like they're wonderful. They bring us together, but they're not a substitute for in-person human connection. And that circles back obviously to the cities versus villages and the physical ability to be together. Have you experienced, like, with your work in building the social um, platform, like, do you feel like it complements people being able to live, in that village mindset, like physically? Does it encourage that somehow?
Yeah, and that's, I think, what um, needs to happen today is that even if you're living in a city, you can have community that's based not necessarily just on where you live, but on people that you really resonate with. So the
Yeah.
question is how you find them and then how you actually stay together as a community. And the company that I'm advising, Tribe, founded by Chaya,
Yeah.
she has done, yeah, it's amazing.
Tribe's awesome. Yeah.
She's done so much work throughout her life on building community, and realizing what you need, like what you said, just being part of a WhatsApp group is not enough. So what does it actually mean to have community? So having weekly catch-ups, having monthly catch-ups, like in-person meetings. And she and so that's what I think is really important. So how do you create technology that brings people together, but also helps and supports communities to actually build true, deep human connection, which effectively is in person. It's not going to be on an app.
Yeah.
Um, and it's challenging.
It is, and I love what you said. I mean, I like the idea. I mean, clearly through Bitcoin and through music, through all these different opportunities of our missions, our purpose in life, we get to meet. Whoa, look, I get to be a part of this Bitcoin community. Oh yeah, I get to be a part of this meditation community. Woohoo. And it really matters to purposefully take time to be together, especially because we are, distributed all over the world, which is exciting. And so what's there's no formulaic way for community to really happen, but it'd be neat to like understand like how do thriving communities that are all over the world stay thriving. I think of like 12-step communities as an example, right? And so
Yep.
there's a framework. It's 12 steps. Everybody's on a mission to get, not be a sex addict or not drink alcohol or not do cocaine or whatever the substance du jour is. But they've got a formula that they all are like, we subscribe to this and we're on the same mission. And anywhere in the world, they can go walk into a room and they'll know that those folks are of like heart and like soul and they have a similar purpose, And so I know when we first talked, I'm still, this 11X project it's happening. It's slow. And I'm like, what do I do with this thing? Cause I'm similar to you. It's like, I want to build online opportunities for people to connect. And I want in-person stuff too, that are tied into a certain ethos, like a certain manifesto. Um, and I think it's important to have lots of conversations, see what's working. We don't need to reinvent the wheel. Um, and so I think it's important. Do you feel like, I mean, I don't know, you can say, "Shut up, Val," if you don't want to answer this question. Um, but what's been your personal experience showing up in a virtual community? Like, do you feel that you can, over time, have you developed enough of a rapport or relationship where you can break down and just have snot fangs and cry and just be like, I'm really screwed. I need help today. Or do you feel like you have to keep it up on like, everything's okay? I'm just curious what your experience has been.
Um, there's one community which is a much smaller group community that I felt like that in, that I could open up a lot, which was curated by Summit, which is how Nico and I actually met.
Oh, cool.
So I think they did a really good job of curating the structure so that it was really about building trust and then allowing and encouraging vulnerability within that circle of trust. But it takes time
Mhm.
and intention and structure to actually create that, particularly in an online um, environment.
Was it a couple questions? Was it a paid experience to begin with, and was there a facilitator in the beginning, or was it peer to peer?
Yes, and yes, paid
Yes.
and facilitator.
And then after are you still a part of this community? And
Yep,
has it transitioned from the facilitator paid model to peer to peer?
yep.
And that's the intention of how that flows?
I don't know that it was the intention, but it is how it's flowed. And those
Cool.
people have become such close friends that even outside of the structure, I feel like I can go to them with anything that I need, or that I can be really open with them.
I love that. I know I see that as a model that seems to work for a lot of folks. Like they've
Mm,
got, their women's group or their men's group or their whatever, their entrepreneur group that they're rocking, their mastermind for a year or whatever it is that they're doing, or maybe 2 years, and then they bond, and then that cohort moves on, to do peer to peer. Like, well, we're not letting this go because it's
yeah,
great.
interesting.
Um, I've found in some, and you've obviously got way more experience than I do in this, but it seems like when you have just peer to peer groups starting out, it's difficult to keep the container if there's
Mm,
not like that structure, like you had said, because it's kind of like what's the format, what's the uh, consistency, for meetings and communicating. I think they both have great valid, use cases. I'm not sure what the right approach is. It seems like it starts up this way and then goes peer to peer. Um,
I mean, I'm a big fan of structure in everything personally.
yeah.
I think structure always helps when you have so much, bring order from the chaos,
Yeah.
and can just help like really curate and get the right outcome, whether it's like um, at an event that you plan and having structure around helping people connect rather than just throwing everyone in and hoping for the best.
Yeah.
So if your intention for an event is to build like for each other to connect with people to connect with each other, how do you actually design structures around that? Whether it's, and not in an annoying way, but I think there's ways you can do that, and not enough people. Um, yeah, I feel like you can sometimes go to a party and come away feeling completely disconnected,
Totally.
or lonelier than when you went. And the same, I guess, with online groups. That if there isn't more than just throwing people in together, maybe it works, but maybe it doesn't. But by having structure, you have a much better probability of having a really powerful outcome.
I agree. I like that vibe too. I'm not somebody who's just like, let's just go hang out and be at this cocktail party with nothing that we're actually focusing on or having these little breakouts or a focal point or some little chunks of experiential
Mm.
opportunities to connect with each other. Those feel yummier to me as a human. Um, yeah, this is so fun. Wow, you're just rocking it, sister. I'm so happy to know you and really like I just feel like we are young in this journey in Bitcoin and this evolution as women as well. I think it's really interesting and fun. I mean, I've seen a lot of there's a lot of weird things going on out there in social media with like the masculine and the feminine and all of these things. And I'm just like, wow, I look at things like a pendulum, right? We get all excited and we want hyper freedom and everything's got to be way over here. And then there's no structure. And then we come back and we keep going back and forth. I mean, where do you see us as a human race in say 10 to 20 years? As I say 10 years, even just 10 years. We don't have to go shoot the moon over here, but just 10 years from now in like 2032, what do you think is going to be happening?
Oh, that's a very big question. I think we're in for a pretty challenging period in the next few years, to be honest.
Yeah.
I don't know. It's really hard to predict or have predict timing of change. A lot of what I see is that humanity is heading completely in the right direction, whether it's around so much greater awareness, ecological awareness, awareness of um, emotional awareness, people really kind of learning how to grow internally, heal trauma, connect with each other. There's so much wisdom and knowledge that's coming from the East, that's coming from Indigenous communities, that's being developed, and such an openness to spirit. If I want to call it spiritual work, I'm not, that's a very broad term. So I would
Mhm.
say that, mm, mm, and then that makes me very positive on the direction of humanity. Um, but things need to get shaken up. And when you have these big transition, I guess, transformational, I guess, revolutions, you could call them, that are happening, whether it's the spiritual revolution or the monetary revolution that we're a part of, it's inevitable that the existing power structures will fight back, whether it's consciously or unconsciously.
Mhm.
Um, and that's going to create chaos and conflict in that transitional period. So, what we're seeing in China now and how they're cracking down on their population, because the population is starting to become politically aware because they no longer uh, have the same economic opportunities as they did 10 years ago. Um, and so there's this sort of greater political awareness coming up. And as a result, the Chinese government is cracking down even harder. And so that just being kind of one particular example, and it's happening in the world more broadly. So 10 years, I don't know. 50 years, I think everything's, it's really hard to know. I think there's going to be a lot of changes in our political structures. I think the concept of the nation state needs to be rethought, which obviously is very, very interlinked to monetary control,
Mhm.
and obviously very, very linked to Bitcoin. Um, but I really see that there's sort of this like, we think of what happened in Haight Ashbury in the 60s and all of the spiritual awakening that was happening, and then it was really crushed by and put behind the scenes for a long time. And I think a lot of that is re-emerging now, and
Yeah.
people need it more than ever. And so the question is whether, I don't think it can be crushed in the same way as it once was, because we have so much access to information through the internet, which wasn't available then,
Yeah.
and access to connectivity. So all of that is to say, I have no idea. There are many
Yeah.
trajectories and many trends, but to kind of plot out a 10-year time frame is difficult.
I know it's like you just never know from one day to the next of what really is gonna happen, and I know Bitcoin certainly has got my heart and my soul so much more hope. I couldn't
Mm,
imagine, like, I don't know, I couldn't imagine a future without it at this point, like, it's like the before and after Bitcoin, in your life, like, there's that delineation of, "Oh, wow, this is what the future can look like." When I became a DJ and got music into my life, I was like, "Oh my gosh, I can go do this stuff too? Holy cow." It was just like, it's almost like I got a whole new color palette in my life, learning about Bitcoin and certainly music. And um, it's hopeful. It is tough though to see that there is going to be a lot of struggle and some pain, of course, associated with a lot of the crumbling of certain structures that probably will be inevitable over time, certainly over a 100-year period. Who the heck knows what's going on in there? Elon's going to be trying to stick those things in our brain. Oh. Can you imagine? Like, that's a whole trippy thing. I was watching like a spy, what is it called? Spyware or spycraft, I think it was called. It was a documentary on Netflix, but it was talking about all these different ways that they, can spy on you, over all over the place. And I think about, like, they can just, if they say if there's at birth, like, oh, you need to get your whatever vaccine they're going
mhm,
to give you. And then every human that's born is now traceable with nanotechnology or something. I don't know. It just seems really like, I don't know. I,
I mean, I don't. We all carry iPhones with us,
I know.
so I don't think they need to inject us with anything because we already do it voluntarily.
I know. It's
But
crazy.
yeah, I feel like our thoughts, and you read 1984, right? And it's all about the government controls. But so much of the story is how you still have control of your thoughts. And you still, that's like the one place where the government can't access is your thoughts. And so there was like this whole concept of the thought police.
Yeah.
But yeah, this is like that last bastion of sovereignty is potentially gone.
It really is. It's an interesting time that we're in this, even with having the advent of the cell phones, right? And you think like, I didn't have a cell phone growing up when I was a kid or in college or anything like that. It was very like, yeah, here's your go put a quarter in and make a call.
Yeah.
Um, and so now this is just native, so I'm like, what's the next native thing that's going to come around that's just so easily, like everybody has that, and it's the ethics of technology, combined with, how do we still stay human, and still stay connected with our heart and with all of these good things. So yeah, lots to talk about for sure. uh,
Yeah, it's a big topic.
it is. I know this will be like a 10-part series. um, is there anything else maybe you want to share with the audience about yourself, what's going on down the road, any favorite little recipes, snacks, fun things, musical tidbits that that would make their lives better?
Oh, nothing really comes to mind right now. Yeah.
Right on. Well, what are you dressing up? Are you going to be dressed up at Pacific Bitcoin? You got some funky outfits? You got
Oh
anything that you're
God.
going to wear to these
I own
parties and
so
all that
little
stuff?
clothing. I've gotten rid of everything I own several times in my life.
Really?
And just
Wow.
having moved to the US, I'm living out of like two suitcases at the moment, which is great.
Awesome.
I honestly like love the feeling of owning as little as possible. That's going to change in the next couple of years, but yeah, so clothing is like very limited. But that's fine.
We're just going to have fun no matter what. I'm going to
Exactly.
definitely look to see you there. That's going to be such a great opportunity to say hey to you and everybody. Like, yeah, it's exciting. Lots of good
Yeah.
things happening. Well, congratulations on the company. Congrats on in the fund and all the two companies. And you said the third one's coming. We're going to find out soon. Is that correct?
Yep. Timeline TBD, but yeah, it's coming.
TBD,
Yeah.
TBD. Yeah, I want to check everything out. So, well, everybody who is listening, you guys can find Andi Pitt on Twitter. You can go to one Andi, ANDIPITT, and you can also go check out egodeath.capital. That's her and Jeff and Nico's wonderful project that is going to be doing lots of Bitcoin layer 3 opportunities for the future. So this is great. I really, really appreciate you taking so much time to talk and share your story. And it's just really nice to know you, Andi. This is going to be fun journey.
Likewise, thank you so much for having me. It's been a great conversation, and yeah, I really appreciate you having me on the podcast.
Yeah, definitely. So, all right, everybody. So I hope you all enjoyed this show and thanks for tuning in to Bitcoin Peace and Music. My name is DJ Valerie Beloved, and I want to make sure you guys go follow Andi on Twitter and send her a hello if you like. And if you guys are at Pacific Bitcoin, come say hi to us. We'll be somewhere there. Right on. All right, everybody. Peace, love, and aloha. I hope you guys have an awesome day. And thanks again, Andi. You're the bomb.
Thanks so much. See you later. Bye.
Yay. Okay. Aloha.